Welcome to the Beside Me podcast, where we talk about purpose, society, and space. I'm your host, Corey Flagler, and today we'll be focusing on space and how it connects to our society. We have a special guest today, who is my uncle, and he is a perfect person for this because he works for NASA. So go ahead and introduce yourself to the listeners.
What's going on, nephew, first of all? And truly it's an honor and a privilege to be on this podcast with you. I'm proud of you, man. Proud of you for sure. You're doing some big things, man. I just want to first start off by saying that. So yeah, I am Corey's uncle, and I'm a NASA scientist. Just to give you a little bit of background, I'm from Durham, North Carolina originally. Graduated from the illustrious North Carolina A&T, Aggie Pride. Got all of my degrees from there, bachelor's, master's in environmental science, PhD in energy and environmental systems. And I actually got a NASA fellowship while I was in school, which actually gave me an internship. That's pretty much where my journey started. And then after the internship, I got a postdoc at NASA as well, where I was a scientist for 3 years. I left, went into the industry for a while, where I actually went into vertical farming, lived in New Jersey for 5 years, and now I'm back in Florida as a project scientist at NASA, and I've been here for about 4 months now.
Wow. It seems like you definitely had a lot of school to do.
Yeah, too much school, but I can't regret it. I don't regret anything. That I went to school 10 years straight, man. And that's 10 years post high school.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so,
Woo.
but it paid off. It took a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
patience and endurance, but it was worth it. I have no regrets, man. It actually played a big part in landing me where I am right now.
Oh yeah, that's amazing. It gives a little motivation for people to also want to, pursue their doctorate, and they have a lot of years ahead of them in school.
There you go.
So first and foremost, could you talk about what it is you do at NASA and its importance?
That's a really good question. So, in addition to having the privilege of being your uncle for the last 2 decades, which makes me feel super old, so I'm a NASA plant scientist, but I wear many hats that help support and advance food production for space. So I conduct research that makes it possible to properly select which crops are suitable for space. For instance, what light recipes to use to grow them, and what substrates to grow the plants in. I'm also working on a food safety plan, for instance, for future growth chambers that will be deployed on Mars transit vehicles. I'm trying to ensure that the processes involved in growing food in space don't make our astronauts sick. I'm also the technical point of contact for a NASA collaboration with the USDA, in hopes that someday we'll be able to actually grow microgreens in space. And so microgreens basically, you may have seen them as like garnish on foods. They're the really small seedlings, but they have a lot of flavor, a lot of nutrients, 5 times the nutrients as a mature crop, but they grow quick. They grow in like 7 to 10 days. And so we're basically trying to spruce up the packaged astronaut diet to give them something that's, pleasurable or, aromatic, but also has a ton of flavor. And so that collaboration with the USDA is pushing that forward. Also, we're collaborating with the USDA at a plant biotechnology laboratory at the Disney Epcot Center, and that investigates the role of beneficial microbes for plants. And then lastly, at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, I'm actually the plant process area manager. So, for instance, I manage, the area that has all the ground control experiments that we conduct in these controlled environment growth chambers. But of course, all in all, the importance, like, of all of these roles that I have, basically, I'm trying to ensure that we supplement the astronaut diet with fresh food, not just for their physical nourishment and nutrition, but also we use plants for environmental control and life support. And not only that, but there's a psychological aspect to it. Like, there's always something pleasant about having plants in your environment. So it actually makes the having a harsh environment of space very easy for the astronauts.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of the Martian movie a little bit. You know how he growing those plants on Mars, and it
Yeah,
kind of helped him out. You know, with him being up there alone. And you definitely did mention the how what crops can be grown in space. So what I guess what exactly what crops can be grown in space, and
that's
which
that's a
ones?
good question. Good question. So for the last 10 years or so, we've been focusing a lot on leafy green crops, basically crops that grow quick. And by quick, I mean like lettuces or leafy greens. For instance, in the field, they would grow like 70 days, for instance, a full head of lettuce. But
Mm.
when you have a controlled environment and everything is controlled, I'm talking about temperature, humidity, CO2, irrigation, it gives a nice, happy environment for the plants to grow in. And so they actually grow in half the time. When there's no
Oh.
interruption, they don't have to worry about drought or, floods or animals or anything like that. Everything's controlled. You can grow crops twice as fast.
Ooh.
And so basically, leafy green crops, which basically we can grow in 28 days, which would normally grow 70 days.
Mm.
That's the idea. That's the beauty of having a controlled environment. But also, there's a push, like I said, for microgreens is the next stage because they grow even faster. You can grow them in 7 to 10 days. But we also are focusing on some fruiting aspects. We just grew tomatoes, and they fruiting crops will take normally like 70 days, even in a controlled environment. But
Mm.
um, you know, there are dwarf varieties, for instance, dwarf varieties of melons and cucumbers that we're actually working with, and they grow pretty, significantly faster. But we don't have a lot of space in space, so everything we grow has to be small and compact. But we're trying to diversify the astronaut diet as best as we can.
Oh yeah, gotta can't be eating the same thing all the time because
That's right. There's a concept that's called menu fatigue, and it's real.
mm,
And so we're trying to address that. I mean, that's in any kind of isolated environment. If you're gonna get tired of eating the same thing every day,
yeah.
including astronauts. And so we're trying to make sure that we have as many options for them as we can.
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. And you mentioned the light combinations, light recipes to use. So what exactly does that mean? Is it like certain colors or the type of light?
Right. So when I was a postdoc, my main focus was lighting, and light quality basically is the color of the light. You can
Mm.
change how a plant grows by changing the color of the light. And so there are
Wow.
different color combinations that you can actually provide for the plant to elicit specific responses. For instance, if you want a crop, you want to keep it really really small. You bump up the blue light. For most leafy greens crops, blue light causes them to dwarf themselves
Whoa.
because blue light is a higher energy of the color spectrum. It's a shorter wavelength, and so blue light has potential. If it's too much, it will damage DNA. And so plants
Mm.
respond to that by staying short. But if you want to, for instance, kind of elongate the crop or boost the yield up, then you'll boost the red light up. So red light actually has a kind of opposite effect, and plants have adapted to that because when you have an environment with a lot of red light, for instance, in nature, when the sun is low, you notice that at sunset the sky is kind of like fire, right? It's like
Yeah.
orange red.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of red, a lot of far red, but that is a signal for the plants. They have adapted themselves to use that as a signal to grow taller. And so you can
Oh.
use these colors in artificial lighting to basically tell the plant to grow however you want it to. And then
That's
the third
cool.
aspect is these wavelengths. For instance, the blue light can also induce certain nutrient compounds or certain flavor compounds.
Mm.
So, for instance, one way plants try to adapt themselves to that, if they're undergoing DNA damage from a high blue light, they'll produce more antioxidants as their protective mechanism, which, of course, is probably hard on the plant, but it's good enough for us because antioxidants in our diet are super nutritious and they're
Oh
super
yeah.
super healthy. So that's one way we can use light recipes.
Wow, that's that's really cool. So it's right manipulating the plants pretty much to not say do what you want, but in a way,
Yeah,
tell it how to grow.
relatively speaking. But
But
yeah,
yeah, tell it how to grow.
you can definitely basically tailor the crop or manipulate how it responds when you change the color of the light.
Wow. Sometimes it kind of makes me wonder how people discover something like that.
A
But
lot of times it's accident. You're like, oh, why did this happen when you have this certain type of setting on? But yeah,
oh yeah.
yeah.
So let's go on to the next question. So how has the exploration of space impacted society's understanding of the universe and our place within it?
That is another good question, man. So, I'm just looking at it like for just looking into space. For instance, with advanced space telescopes, like for instance Kepler, we've discovered at least 5,000 exoplanets. In other words, exoplanets means planets outside of our solar system. And then out of those 5,000, there are multiple planets that we have discovered that are actually orbiting in the Goldilocks zone of their parent star. And what that means, you know the story of Goldilocks,
Oh,
right?
oh yeah.
It's a zone where things are not too hot, but not too cold, but it's just in the right position where the possibility of life could happen. Earth is in the Goldilocks zone of our solar system, right? We're in the perfect orbital plane where the existence of water is in liquid. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah.
If it was too hot, it would boil away. Like mercury. Mercury, everything's boiled away.
Yeah.
Or it'll be locked up in ice. Like on Mars, everything's frozen. It's tied up. But Earth, we're like right in the perfect place where everything is a liquid form, and organisms and life can come to being and evolve from that. And so we've actually found planets in that zone in other solar systems outside of our own, which is super cool.
Oh yeah.
So I would say we've realized how small we are compared to what is actually or potentially out there. And then, of course, space exploration has actually improved our way of life here on Earth through a host of inventions. For instance, like, you see me, I'm wearing glasses. Scratch resistant lenses came from exploring space. The memory foam in mattresses, that came from space exploration. Tap water filters or filtration, those things were invented when we were trying to sustain, human beings in space.
Wow.
That camera you got in your phone right now was developed at what is the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California.
What?
Wireless headsets, artificial limbs, made out of titanium. Those were things and materials that were investigated for space use. And then, of course, I talked about manipulating lighting, LED lights, right? I will say the first patent to use LEDs for growing plants was actually funded by NASA to the University of Wisconsin in the 1990s. And that basically allowed us to use LEDs or different colored lighting for growing plants. And all of that just started in the 90s.
Wow.
And my mentor and colleague and friend, Ray Wheeler, who I'm still working with now, actually had some involvement with that. And he was the one who actually, he hammered that on me, like, don't forget LEDs, the first patent was, funded at University of Wisconsin in the 90s. So that's something now I can't forget, but yeah.
Well, that's really cool. I mean, the '90s. It seems like it's not that long ago, and but then again, it is.
A lot has
Oh,
happened.
yeah.
But it also lets you know, like the whole controlled environment, agricultural field, even though we've come a long way in the last 30 years, it's still like in its infancy pretty much. Like we have so much to learn and explore, and that's pretty much what I'm doing now at NASA.
Oh, that's great, man. You kind of just build it from the ground up almost, and seeing the whole
Well,
process grow.
well, I'm working with people who have literally built things from the ground up, like in terms of controlled environment. Like I'm working with these people and I'm learning from them as much as I can. I'm a sponge, man. So, yeah.
Oh, as you gotta be. And going into the next, let's say, what impact has the development of space technology had on society's ability to monitor and respond to natural disasters on Earth?
Okay. Well, I think that's a pretty easy one. I mean, the first thing I can think of, for instance, question, where would we be without launching meteorological satellites into space? So I can tell you now, there are at least 5 great geostationary weather satellites in orbit right now. And what I mean by geostationary, which means that satellite is basically locked in as it orbits around the Earth, it's orbiting in sync with the Earth's orbit. So basically, it's facing the same position all the time. So that means you can monitor weather on certain regions 24/7 around the clock because you've got a satellite that's constantly moving with the orbit of the Earth. And so that has made it possible for us to track, model, and even predict the paths of hurricanes, giving us time to prepare for them, even though some people don't prepare for them when they need to, but we at least now have that opportunity to do so. But remote sensing has made it possible not only for hurricanes but for monitoring. For instance, we had wildfires even this summer in Canada, which have impacted us. I was in Ohio earlier this summer, and we had smog and haze, and they were trying to tell us to wear masks outside because there were wildfires in Canada that was affecting us, and I think it happened in New York as well.
Yeah.
But not only that, but dust storms, volcanoes, landslides, oil spills, floods, all of these things can be monitored with remote sensing.
Wow, yeah. Another those wildfires definitely did come down to North Carolina too.
That's right. That's right.
It was like, yeah, air quality's not that good outside. You might want to wear a mask. I'm like, wow, and it just kind of looked cloudy outside, and I was just, it kind of amazed me how something in Canada could come all the way down to the south and affect the air quality way down here. And I was asking my dad about that too. I was like, well, how is that possible?
Right.
And just
well, the thing is, those warning systems, right? Like there had to been some way to catch that, and for us to say, because I remember we were getting warnings like, you should wear your mask. Like at least we had the opportunities, made possible by those satellites, to kind of give us the heads up.
Oh yeah, definitely. And then for the longest, I never knew we had satellites to monitor, the weather. Like it never occurred to me. I know we had, many weather instruments, on the ground and stuff like that. But it never occurred to me that we use satellites to, monitor. Like you see the weather channel, you see the weather, and you see how like the covers going across the screen, So I just never would have thought that would be satellites, monitoring that. It's just.
I mean, you got to think about it. You turn on the weather channel, you see a high defined image of a hurricane eye. I'm like, there's no way they did that from the ground. It had to come from above. So
it had to come from above. Oh yeah, definitely. So next, we have how exactly has space technology been used to improve communication and connectivity around the world? Are there any uncommon space spin-offs out there that haven't really heard of?
Well, I do know recently more satellites have been launched, for instance, to provide Wi-Fi on airplanes or internet at least access, and that in itself is literally more connectivity around the world. And like recently, like my girlfriend now, she can text me from the plane, which is like before, they tell you go in airplane mode and then that's it. You're like in silence and, for the rest of the flight. But, she now has that ability to text me. When she gets on the Wi-Fi, she can text me from the plane now, which is cool. But again, that's all made possible by, the launching of these satellites for space. But another spinoff I can think of actually is one I'm about to get in the next few weeks, invisible braces. So like they're made of this transparent polycrystalline alumina, which was actually used for protecting infrared antenna on heat-seeking missile technology, because it absorbs certain wavelengths of light. And so yeah, because I got some overcrowding in the front that I'm trying to on the bottom. As I got note, I hate that I've waited 40 years to get invisible braces, but I'm like, this overcrowding I've got in the bottom. Like I need to get that straightened out. So because I'm just trying to eat a mango the other week, right? And like when you get to the fibrous part, I was getting all these fibers at the bottom because of my overcrowd, and I was trying to floss. Like it wouldn't come out. I was like, you know what? This is becoming a problem. So I'm gonna get my bottom teeth straightened out. But it's just cool to think that technology again came from our endeavors to explore space.
Wow, that's something I probably never would have connected at all. It's something dealing with being in your mouth,
right?
And it's like, oh yeah, because we space exploration, help discover that.
Yep.
But that's really cool. And you mentioned like the Wi-Fi on airplanes. I know for the longest, me and many others has suspected that the reason we have data is because of satellites and up in Earth's orbit. But then we learned that that's not the case.
Right.
It's really from the cell phone towers that we have. Like I just knew for some reason when I go out somewhere that I have data because of satellite. No, that was never the case. So maybe we're getting there eventually, and now we have Wi-Fi on airplanes. So it's kind of seems like it's probably headed that way eventually. But the cell phone towers work, so I think
Yeah.
we'll be fine.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I have I'm very interested in space, almost down to the technicalities. I can talk about it for hours. I can really sit here and talk your head off. But that's not what I'm here to do. But I want the viewers to be able to take something away from this episode, not just have a whole bunch of facts. Because what are facts if you can't necessarily apply them or use them? So to you, as someone who works for NASA, why does space exploration matter? Why should everyday society even care?
That's a really good question, man. And I will, like I mentioned earlier, before I worked at NASA, I worked for a private company that installed indoor vertical farms. And basically, those farms were constructed using a lot of the NASA concepts for controlled environment agriculture. For instance, I mentioned LEDs, right? Water purification systems. All of that started out in the early 90s, like years ago, when NASA was just trying to figure out how we're going to design habitats for astronauts to be able to grow crops that would actually keep them alive. Because you got to think, plants, they don't just consume water, they also emit a lot of water in a process called transpiration. There's a lot of water vapor that they're basically releasing into the air. But that water can actually be condensed and captured and reutilized as fresh water.
Whoa.
So that they call it closing the recirculation loop. And so plants are a part of that loop that would actually serve as a life support system for astronauts, because not only are they removing the excess CO2 from the air and turning it basically into oxygen, which the astronauts can breathe again, but they're doing the same thing with water and with nutrients as well. And then, of course, they're a source of food. And so that's why we consider plants to be a life support platform. But also the concept of multi-tiered hydroponic systems. So, for instance, I mentioned that there's not a lot of space in space. Whether you're on a transit vehicle or on a surface habitat, you got to conserve your space, right?
Yeah.
So instead of, trying to construct a big field of, greens or whatever, you got to stack it. You build vertically instead of horizontally, you save your space. And NASA was already doing that in the early 90s in a system called the Biomass Production Chamber. And they were testing it. They were literally stacking layers of, they were growing potatoes, lettuce. At the time, it was under, like the HPS lighting, which is the orange street lights you see now, but because they didn't have LEDs. Then, like I mentioned, LEDs were just getting started,
Yeah.
but they were using what they had at the time. But they were actually stacking these crops vertically, which now today vertical farming is, basically you're stacking or growing upwards instead of outwards to save on space. And so, like I mentioned, we basically retrofitted an existing warehouse, which wasn't that big, but because we utilized our space so efficiently, we were able to produce a lot of, or a high yield of crops in a small amount of area. And so basically society should care, because these farms now feed the world, right? And then after all the other spinoffs that I mentioned earlier, as a result of space exploration, it matters to me because we use these things every day, right? It matters to me not because of, what has already been invented, but what has still yet to be invented, right? There's so much left that hasn't been invented yet. And just because we're researching and doing things on how to make things better, I'm excited to see what's to come after this, honestly. Just looking at what we already have,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then the next 10 years, next 20 years, what's going to be invented, because there's so many good things coming just out of the research we're doing. So, yeah, I think all of these things will still, change life on Earth for the better.
Oh yeah, and shoot, I I can 100% can believe believe that and get behind that, because I think space is, I love space, and I can talk about it, like I said, for hours. And I think that it really contributes to a lot of what we do down here, and it's also something that we can work towards. We kind of necessarily we didn't explore all of what's on Earth, but now that we're looking, towards the stars, is that now we have something that we can, work towards. Maybe we can get out there and we can invent something to help us get out there. So it's kind of like always looking, you know like you said, looking towards something to be invented.
Right. Right. Well, actually, so nephew, I got a question for you. Man.
Okay. Go ahead and shoot. What's the question?
While we talking, man, while I got you down here.
Okay.
So for those of y'all who don't know, my nephew is down here with me for the weekend because it was his grandma, my mom's 75th birthday, and he actually had the luxury or the exciting opportunity to see a rocket launch.
Oh yeah.
He had the opportunity to see two. He missed one because he fell asleep on the first night, but the second one, the Falcon Heavy, launched on Friday night, and it was amazing, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
He found out that this Falcon Heavy rocket launched a 9.2 ton satellite, which was going to increase communications in the Americas by 80% or something like that. But he saw this rocket like it had to have a certain amount of thrust to get this 9.2 ton satellite. I think they said it was the heaviest satellite launched ever.
Whoa.
I had to confirm that, but I believe that's what they said.
Oh man.
So you need a lot of pounds of thrust to get that thing off of the surface and through max Q, what we call max Q. Basically, that's the point where there's the maximum exertion of force on the rocket from the atmosphere. The atmosphere, it's made of molecules and atoms, but you have to think it's at a certain density. When you're moving at that speed, that's a lot of pressure, man.
Oh yeah.
So you have to have that thrust to get you off, but you also got to survive the climb. And we saw that. My nephew got to see that. Not only did he see that, he got to see them re-land two of those boosters back on the ground from the patio. So my question, nephew, man, like when you got to see that, and I'm assuming that's your first launch, right?
Yes, definitely.
So he got to see his first launch. What was going through your mind? Like, what are your thoughts now? Now that not only we talked about all the things that go into space exploration, right? All the things that have to get us to that next step, right? Of going back to the moon, going to Mars, or even just inventing things that make the exploration easier. What are your thoughts now that you've gotten to see that firsthand? You've got to experience the light. Mm-hmm. And the sound of it, it literally vibrated my building, y'all.
Yes.
But what are your thoughts, man? Honestly, how does that make you feel when you experience that in person, and how does that kind of convince you that what we're doing is real? Like what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first I'm gonna just say that it was an amazing experience. Everybody should, try to see a rocket launch, at least once in your lifetime, because it's not. I don't think there's something that it's not many things that can top it. I'll say that. Watching it, take off, and it's so bright, and you're like, it's nighttime. It was like the sunrise, like
right.
And it's just and you don't hear anything for like a couple minutes, and then it just, as a wave, just kind of comes to you, like, oh my gosh, this thing is loud. And like we're like so many miles away, but it's so loud, and that just, I don't know. I don't want to say like it kind of woke something up, but I feel like it kind of, made me tingle just a little bit, because it kind of made me a little happy, as in, okay, this is real. It's like, I seen it on TV, I seen it in movies, and movies, have, somewhat of a reality to it, but it's just seeing it right there, firsthand, and see it going into the clouds. You're like, we really are putting, instruments out there, and, satellites that can help us. And then even when they came back down, the boosters, and, we seeing that on social media, saying that, this corporation was trying to, land the rockets back or whatever. And just seeing that come back down and be able to land was just, it was amazing. And the sonic boom was super loud too.
That's
but
right.
That scared the mess out of me. Yeah, it was two of them.
You got the double sonic booms.
Yeah. It really, I wouldn't say it kind of necessarily woke me up, but it kind of made me fall in love again. I
Mm,
can say definitely maybe fall in love again because it's amazing what we can do once we have a goal in mind, and I think
mm.
that's a big thing because for the longest I bet that we just probably thought about re-landing rockets, but it probably never just was able to be done, and now that we're able to do it,
Yeah,
that's amazing.
yeah, yeah.
It saves a lot of money for sure.
Absolutely,
I can
absolutely.
imagine. Oh yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no way that this we're faking this thing. Like,
Yeah. There's
and
no
I
way.
look at what I do every day. Even if I'm in growth chambers, growing plants. Like, I know it's for a purpose. It's for a
Yes.
reason. It's like I'm not here wasting my time. Like,
Right.
we're doing this. We're sending astronauts to where they've never been,
Yeah.
and they gotta eat, right? They have to eat, and that we
Gotta
don't
eat.
want them to get menu fatigue. We want them to enjoy what they eat, and keep their psychological mind where it should be, because they're already going to be challenged by the environment. So
Yeah.
we're just trying to make this thing happen, and even a little small component of it, it's still important. And so, yeah, man, I'm definitely honored, man. And I think this was a really good conversation.
Oh
Again,
yeah. Oh
I'm proud of
yeah.
you, nephew. And I know this is probably not going to be the last time I'm on here. So,
Oh yeah. Not at all. Not at all.
but definitely, I enjoyed you, man, for sure. Keep it up.
Oh yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Appreciate you appreciate me having you. Appreciate you
It's
coming
all
on the
good.
podcast and talking and being able to share what you do at NASA and just a little bit kind of picking your brain a little bit. And I also
Absolutely.
wanted to say just every time we launch a rocket or anything like that, is we're doing the impossible. That's what I think. That's what I think of it. We going up into conditions where oxygen is not there, in a vacuum is that's impossible. It's
Right.
kind of like humans are necessarily not supposed to stay on Earth, but it's like every time you do it, you're doing the impossible. You're doing it over again. So I think that's just really cool when you think of it like that. Kind of blows your mind a little bit.
Right. Right. And everything has to go right.
Yes.
You've got literally a million pieces that have to work together. And unfortunately, some things happened over the years that didn't go right, and
Yeah.
people lost their lives, and we have to
Mhm.
remember that.
Oh
People
yeah.
lost their lives, and we've learned from those mishaps to make things better.
Oh yeah.
And so, it really, like, it's an insult when someone say this is all fake. Like, there's no way. Like, people have literally sacrificed themselves to advance this endeavor. And so, that's a slap in the face when someone says that, because it's not. And you've seen it firsthand
Yes.
what we do here, at the Space Center, and what we're capable of. And again, this is only the beginning, honestly, man. And so I'm excited about the years to come, because I'm getting busier and busier, and like there are a lot of things that I got to do just on the food production side, and
Yeah.
so yeah, just stay tuned, y'all.
Yes, yes. Stay tuned. Well, thank you for coming. Like I said before, I appreciate you and all your opinions and your answers. And it was amazing to have you on here. I hope our conversation enlightens those who are listening, and hopefully you all can learn something and take something from this. So I appreciate you, and peace out.
Appreciate your nephew, man. Thank you.